I'm 82 years old, and my wife has been gone for almost 3 years now. I still catch myself turning my head when I hear a sound in the kitchen, thinking it might be her, and then remembering there's no one there. It's strange what stays with you at this age. Not the big moments, not the anniversaries or the trips or the things people talk about at funerals. What stays with me are the small, ordinary moments I barely noticed when they were happening. The way she would start a sentence and stop halfway through. The way she would look at me for a second longer than necessary, like she was waiting for something I didn't realize she was asking for. I used to think I was a good husband. Not perfect, but decent. I worked. I provided. I never cheated. I came home every night. I thought that was the job. Now I sit alone in the same house, and I understand something too late. I heard her voice for almost 5 decades. But I don't think I ever truly listened to her. Not the way I should have. We met when I was 32 and she was 29. I was working at a small engineering firm, still trying to prove myself, still convinced that life hadn't really started yet. She worked at a public library. Quiet job. Quiet woman, the kind of person who never tried to take up space in a room. On our first date, she told me about a book she loved. I don't even remember which one. I remember nodding, smiling, pretending I understood what she was talking about. I was already thinking about my next promotion. She laughed easily. Not loudly, just a soft laugh, like she was careful not to disturb anyone. We got married 2 years later. No big wedding. Just family. A small hall, bad food, cheap music. I remember thinking how practical it all was. No debt, no waste. That word followed me through my whole life, practical. Our early years were busy. 2 kids, mortgage, long hours. I would leave before sunrise most days and come home when the house was already quiet. She would tell me about her day, the kids. Something funny that happened at the library. Something that upset her. I'd listen with half my attention while reading emails or watching the news. I'd respond with the same phrases. That's nice. That's frustrating. It'll work out. I thought that counted as listening. She never complained much. That's the part that fools you. When someone doesn't demand, you assume they don't need. But she did try in her own way. She'd say things like, "Do you ever feel like we're always in a hurry even when we're home?" Or, "Sometimes I think I talk too much." I'd laugh and say, "You're fine. You worry too much." I didn't realize those were invitations, not to fix anything, just to be present. In my 40s, work got heavier, more responsibility, more people reporting to me, more stress I carried like a badge of honor. I'd come home tired, mentally still at the office. She'd wait until after dinner to talk, like she didn't want to interrupt my recovery time. She'd sit across from me at the table, hands wrapped around her mug, and say, "Can I tell you something?" And I'd say, "Sure," while still thinking about deadlines. She talked about feeling lonely, about missing her friends who had moved away, about the kids growing up too fast. I told her she should find a hobby, join a club, stay busy. I thought I was being helpful. What I was really saying was, handle this yourself. There was a night I think about a lot now. I must have been around 55. She had been quiet all evening. I noticed, but I didn't ask why. At some point she said, "Do you think we still know each other?" I remember feeling irritated, not angry, just tired. I said, "Of course we do. We've been together forever." She nodded, didn't argue, just said, "Yeah." That's what I thought. And that was the end of the conversation. At the time, I felt relieved, crisis avoided, back to normal. Now I realize that might have been one of the most honest things she ever said to me. And I brushed it aside like it was nothing. The years passed quietly. That's the dangerous part. There was no explosion, no dramatic fight, just small silences that grew larger. The kids moved out. The house got quieter. She talked less. I noticed, but I didn't connect it to anything. I thought this was just what long marriages looked like. Comfortable, predictable, peaceful. But it wasn't peace. It was distance. She would tell me stories about her childhood, about her mother, about things she regretted. And I would respond with solutions or jokes or nothing at all. I never asked follow-up questions. I never said, "Tell me more." I never said, "How did that make you feel?" Those words feel foreign in my mouth even now. When she turned 70, she retired from the library. I remember her standing in the living room on her last day, holding a box of her things, looking lost. She said, "I don't know what I'm supposed to do now." I told her, "You've earned the rest. Enjoy it." She smiled. But it wasn't a real smile. She started spending more time alone, gardening, walking, sitting on the porch. I assumed she was content. I didn't see that she was slowly disappearing inside her own life. Sometimes she would sit next to me on the couch and start talking about something small. A neighbor, a dream she had, something she read. I'd listen for a minute, then drift back to my phone or the television. She'd notice. She always noticed. Her voice would trail off. I'd say, "Sorry, what were you saying?" And she'd say, nothing important. That phrase should have scared me, but I accepted it because it made my life easier. The truth is, I thought we had unlimited time. I thought there would always be another conversation, another weekend, another chance to pay better attention. She was healthy for most of her life. No major illnesses, no warnings. So I treated her presence like a permanent feature of the world, like gravity. Then one day she forgot a word, just one. In the middle of a sentence, she laughed it off. I laughed too. But it happened again and again. Doctor visits followed. Tests, long words we didn't fully understand. The diagnosis came quietly, like everything else in our life. Early stage dementia. The doctor explained what would happen. Gradual memory loss, confusion, personality changes. I nodded like I understood, like this was just another problem to manage. On the drive home, she stared out the window and said, I'm scared. I said, it'll be okay. We'll handle it. I don't remember touching her hand. I should have. As the years passed, her world shrank. She forgot names, then dates, then places. But what hurt the most was that she stopped trying to talk to me. Not because she couldn't, but because she seemed to sense on some level that it didn't matter. There was a moment, about a year before she died, when she looked at me and said, did I ever tell you what I wanted to do with my life? I said, you worked at the library. You raised the kids. She shook her head slowly. No, before all that, I waited. She didn't continue. That was it. The moment passed, and I didn't push. I didn't ask. I didn't try to recover it. That might have been the last clear thing she ever tried to share with me. Now I will never know what she was going to say. By the time she could no longer finish her sentences, I started realizing how much of her life I had never truly known. Not the surface things. Not where she worked or what she cooked or how she spent her days. I mean the parts that never make it into photographs. The fears. The hopes. The thoughts she carried quietly for years. She would sit in her chair by the window and stare at the garden. Sometimes she would talk to herself. Soft, broken sentences. Names I didn't recognize. Places I'd never heard her mention before. I'd sit nearby and pretend to read. I told myself I was giving her space. The truth is, I didn't know how to enter her world anymore, and I was ashamed of that. One afternoon, she suddenly turned to me and said, do you know who I am? I said her name. She shook her head. No, to you. I didn't know how to answer. I said, you're my wife. She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, I wish I knew what that meant. That sentence stayed with me more than any doctor's words, because I realized I had never really explained it. Not to her, not to myself. I had assumed marriage was about staying, about not leaving, about loyalty and routine and shared history. I had never thought about whether she felt seen. There was another day, not long after, when she asked me, was I happy?
Not my happy, was.
I said yes immediately, too quickly. She frowned like she wasn't sure she agreed with me. I should have asked her why she was asking. I should have said, I don't know, were you? But instead, I reassured her, because that's what I always did. I wrapped discomfort in certainty. Her condition progressed slowly but steadily. She forgot how to make tea, then how to use the phone, then how to recognize our street. But the hardest part wasn't what she lost. It was what she started giving up on sharing. At some point, she stopped trying to explain herself. If I misunderstood, she didn't correct me. If I answered too quickly, she didn't interrupt. She just accepted whatever version of herself I reflected back. And I think she had been doing that long before the illness. I think she had been shrinking herself to fit into the space I allowed. I used to sit beside her at night, listening to her breathe, and realize I had spent 47 years next to a person I never fully met. Not because she was hiding, because I never slowed down enough to look. The final year was quiet. She spoke very little. Mostly single words. Sometimes just sounds. I took care of her, fed her, helped her dress, held her when she cried for reasons she couldn't explain. People told me I was a good husband, that I was devoted, that I was strong. But devotion at the end doesn't erase absence at the beginning. There was one night near the very end when she suddenly became lucid for a few minutes. It was rare by then. The nurse had stepped out. The house was dark and still. She looked at me and said clearly, you were always so busy. Not angry, not accusing, just stating a fact. I said, I know. She nodded. I waited a long time. For what? I asked. She smiled faintly. For you to notice. That was the last complete sentence she ever spoke. She died 2 weeks later in her sleep. No dramatic goodbye. No final speech. Just a quiet ending to a quiet life. At the funeral, people talked about how kind she was. How patient. How supportive. No one talked about what she might have needed. After everyone left, I came back to the house alone. I sat in her chair by the window. And for the first time, I tried to imagine what it had been like to live inside her for 76 years. To love someone who was always present physically, but rarely fully there. I realized something then that still hurts to say. She had been lonely with me. Not alone, but lonely. There is a difference. I thought listening meant hearing words, waiting for my turn to respond, offering advice, nodding at the right moments. But real listening is letting someone exist without trying to manage them. It's allowing their thoughts to stay messy, their feelings unresolved, their stories unfinished. I never gave her that. I rushed her, simplified her, turned her into something easier to carry. Now all I have are fragments, questions I never asked, answers I'll never hear. Sometimes I talk to her out loud, not because I think she can hear me, but because I finally know what I would say. I'd tell her I'm sorry I treated her feelings like problems to solve instead of truths to understand. I'd tell her I was afraid of slowing down, afraid that if I really paid attention, I'd have to face things in myself I didn't want to see. I'd tell her she was more than a role in my life, more than a wife, a mother, a routine. She was a whole person. And I met her too late. If you're listening to this and you still have someone who talks to you every day, someone who shares small thoughts and half-finished sentences, don't assume those moments will always be there. Not in a dramatic way. Just in a quiet, ordinary way, they disappear. And one day you'll sit in a silent room, replaying conversations that ended too soon, and realizing the person you loved spent years waiting for you to really arrive. I used to think love was about time, about decades, about staying. Now I think love is about attention. And attention is the one thing you can't give once it's too late. I have a few years left. If I'm lucky, I spend most of them remembering a woman who tried to be known by me for almost half a century. I don't remember all the things she said, but I remember the way she looked at me when she spoke, like she was hoping I'd finally hear, have